Hello ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to 2C TV, your global news channel. I'm Maya 2C and this is your latest news update, this time from the continent of Europe, specifically Sweden, or Swedenstan these days. There's a massive crisis in Europe, as you guys already know, the rise of so-called multiculturalism, which is no longer about actually diversity of different cultures. It's one culture, the Islamic culture, dominating over the others, is becoming a bit of a headache for the political establishment, not just in terms of the lack of integration, not just in terms of promoting Sharia and jihad, but actually in terms of the finances of the countries. The taxpayers' money in Sweden is going missing. Over $100 million has now gone missing. It's been taken by the Muslim Brotherhood. We're going to give you guys the latest update in this. Of course, we will get your reaction live in the live chat, especially if you're watching from Sweden. I would like to know your thoughts. Now, first things first, people who are from the northern parts of Europe, Scandinavia in general, are already familiar with the problems that's been going on in those countries. Sweden, that was a peaceful place, or as the media would call it, a largely peaceful place, and a lovely culture, lovely people, slowly got taken advantage of. We started seeing the first big wave in the 1990s, but actually until the late 2000s, there was still stability, but things started to happen. What we're talking about in this live stream is about the rise of theft. Now, more than $100 million have now been stolen from the Swedish taxpayers by a network of Islamic Muslim Brotherhood linked imams who ran private schools in Sweden, but have now fled the country. So we have had groups like Muslim Brotherhood and other jihadi groups who have been influencing Swedish society for a long time. Same problem in Germany. Now, both Germany and Sweden, their governments decided to fight back over the last few years, over the last few months especially. We had big waves of deportations. We've had a number of arrests. We had mosques and Islamic schools and Islamic centers being closed down. It's still not enough because things go back a few years back in terms of what these guys have been doing. One level of influence by the Islamic side or the jihadi side in Sweden was to put pressure on the Swedish society to be ashamed of their culture and their heritage and their history. When the Islamic side decided to rise up on the streets of Stockholm, Malmö and other cities to burn the Swedish flag because they got offended on behalf of the 7th century warlord, that was the red flag. The Swedish authorities didn't realize. The political establishment took their time in order to react. Big problem now is the second level of influence, which is education and culture. A number of schools with the influence of so-called imams, because they were just being told, hey, we are just nice imams, we are preachers, look at us, mostly old men, we care. They let them take control of children's education. Now the money has gone missing. An explosive investigation has now confirmed that the group looted over 1 billion Swedish krona in school vouchers and welfare funds and other government schemes. Now the money is going towards the Middle East and North Africa to fund other jihadist groups to then use that to empower themselves to then fight Europeans. There was a reason that a number of dictators that you've had over the last few decades in the Middle East and in North Africa who were very authoritarian, but trying to keep a lid on top of these jihadists. Of course, that lid has now been removed. And these guys are now running around, causing chaos, from Libya to Iraq. Now, of course, the influence of the Western globalists didn't really help that situation either, but the responsibility goes back to the societies in North Africa and the Middle East. And of course, East Africa as well. What are these guys, for example? Did they influence the infiltration? It wasn't just to take money. It's to attack Sweden and Swedish people, influence, brainwash children, force people to do obviously forced child marriages behind closed doors, tried to get Swedish kids to convert to Islam, meanwhile pretending to be the victims, but also infiltrate the political platform. Yes, one of these guys was the former member of parliament, Abdirizak Waberi. Now, he was technically a Swedish politician. He looks very Swedish, as you can see, right? Proper native. He took 12 million Swedish krona using fake IT invoices to find sex clubs in Thailand, luxury hotels, and his own Islamist party, guess where? Oh, yeah, of course. In Somalia. The so-called Swedish politician used that to help the networks, Islamist networks, in Somalia. Now, in case you're not familiar with this one, he was an MP in the Swedish parliament from 2010 until 2014. 4 years of gravy train, using the Swedish taxpayers' money to obviously fund his friends. Now, since 2017, he became the leader of the National Unity Party in Somalia, which is, by the way, officially an Islamic jihadist group. The so-called Swedish politician is now a political leader for Somalia, for the Somalian Islamists. But the authorities, who had the opportunity to get Interpol involved and Europol involved, to investigate, to hunt him down and his friends, didn't do anything. So more of these people, using imams and nice mosques and Islamic schools, decided to take advantage of the generosity of Sweden. Same problem that we've been seeing in Germany. Both Germany and Sweden have been facing massive crises of Islamic influence compared to other European countries on a whole different level. Now, a group of imams, again, nice old men preachers who simply care about faith apparently, but no. A group of imams classified by the Swedish Security Service even in 2019 as threats to national security. Now we have to name and shame them. One of them was Abu Ra'ad, Abdel Nasser El Nadi, and Hussein Al Jibori. They ran schools and preschools that funneled tens of millions to Malta, private individuals, extremist groups, Somalia, and many other regions in the world that hate the West, hate Sweden. A lot of people were complaining about this. There were whistleblowers. They were ignored. Now Sweden is facing a massive crisis. The money is leaving the financial cycle, the money cycle, from Sweden. One of the biggest ways you can bring down a country is to remove the money from the cycle. Because one of the main reasons that, for example, countries are able to remain stable and grow is through either trade, so you sell things to other countries, so you take money from them, or tourism. People go to the country, bring their money. You don't want people to take money from your country to give it somewhere else, let alone a terrorist organization. But that's how you bring down the economy. That's how you drain the financial stability in any Western developed nation. Now, most of these schools now, because the Swedish government are fighting back, have been closed down. Sometimes based on extremism, sometimes based on, of course, the Islamic mafia, as we call it these days now, economic crimes. Now, the Swedish taxpayers that were supposed to be helping that money to have what we call the social democrats, the mentality of a big chunk of Swedish society, which is to basically have a good welfare system and to have a good safety net to help people, the bottom of society. You know, that's the culture in Sweden. Well, because they were generous and they thought, well, if we are basically liberal-minded, that means we could also be open to the world. They forgot to realize that if you don't vet people's backgrounds and you are offering free things to everybody, well, guess what's going to happen? They're going to come and steal your money. Not just to steal for the sake of stealing. It's not just those who are shirkers. The money is being used to be sent abroad to fund jihadist groups, to then use that to fight Sweden and Germany and other countries in Europe. When will these people wake up? The media in Sweden still not really showing any appetite to actually fight back, to expose this. A number of newspapers, of course, have done exposes, but nothing. The government, as I said, there has been a backlash. So over the last few years, we've seen deportations, we've seen a number of arrests, we've seen schools being shut down, Islamic centers being investigated, same trend in Germany. But is it enough? If you walk around the streets of Stockholm, and for those of you, if you have been to Stockholm, and the first time I went there was mid-2000s, and Stockholm was still Stockholm. Yes, you could still diversity, you could still people with different skin color. That was not the biggest issue. The vibe has changed. I mean, security, forget about that. For ordinary people. You can see that Stockholm is no longer Stockholm. And that's just one city. Now, we have a number of people, actually one person watching from Sweden saying Swedish viewer here. Thank you very much. Yeah, let me know your thoughts, of course, especially if you're watching from the country. Andreas says, did you mention that Texas just designated the Muslim Brotherhood as a terrorist organization? Yes, we have. Thank you for that. We've already covered that. And what else do we have? He says, we need a global army fighting against Islam. Africa, Europe, and Asia needs saving. The fascinating part is about how each country is reacting differently. And you would think that because we live in a globalized world, whether you like it or not, it's no longer the 18th century, 17th century. One part of globalization was supposed to be, you would think, it's supposed to be to learn from the best case studies. You know, if you are a small country, if you're, for example, I don't know, Liechtenstein, you could look at, for example, bigger countries like the UK and say, okay, so they're doing this something right about this, they're doing something wrong about this, we should do the best thing. That doesn't really happen. Because, for example, you have Japan. In Japan, the reaction is overreaction, and that's a good thing. So, the liberal media in the West criticize Japan because they say, why are you guys kicking off about mass migration or multiculturalism when in your country it's not really a threat? It's a small percentage. The same attack that the liberal media in Britain have been using to attack people in England who are living in smaller villages, smaller towns, countryside, who were mostly white 10 years ago. And it's not really about white or non-white, by the way. This is just an indication that these people were Anglo-Saxons from England. And they were basically Christian and British. And these guys were complaining about the threat of mass migration and multiculturalism. And the media were attacking them, saying, you're racist. Why are you complaining? Because you don't even, everybody in your village is white and Christian. What's wrong with you? Same thing that they're using on Japan. The Japanese establishment, the Japanese society, you're all racist, you're all far right. Why are you complaining? It's because these guys know what's about to happen. Prevent it early on so it doesn't become a crisis like in Sweden. The right thing to do is what Japan are doing to counter it early on. Now, Japan are also very welcoming to economic migrants who have talent and investment, who would come to Japan, they bring their money, they contribute to society, they take something back, and then they go back home. Expats. The Japanese are still fine with that. They understand. But what they don't like is people to come to take advantage of the system, the generosity, and all the opportunities, and then try to force people in Japan or Sweden to change their way of life. Why? Why should you be tolerant about that? There's absolutely no reason. Using progressive liberalism or political correctness as an excuse doesn't really work. It makes no sense. Now, Swedish viewer here too, unfortunately, from the city where the grape was not long enough. There's a number of other people actually from Sweden, and actually of some neighboring countries. We do have a lot of viewers from Denmark. Big shout out to Denmark as well. Is that people were trying to warn these countries, especially, I thought, so Denmark, for example, was being accused of being racist, even 5-10 years ago, right? Because Denmark, there were a lot of so-called asylum seekers who were going to Denmark, and they also had relatives in Sweden and other places, and they were saying, yeah, we don't like Denmark because there are Danish flags everywhere. The thing about the Danish society was like they didn't want to take any of that, and the fight back started way before Germany, way before Sweden. Sweden were too nice, way too nice. But is it too late? Let me know in the live chat. And Scarlett says Japan is becoming a poor country. It's been going on for a long time. It has lower GDP per head than Slovakia. Yeah, the problem with the Japanese society, there's a whole philosophical debate about this as well. That was a combination of what happened towards the end of 20th century. Capitalism really helped Japan and Korea, of course, just like how it helped the United States. The problem with that is that a combination of, and I'm saying this as a free market capitalist myself, but sometimes some countries, for example in Western Europe, when you do free market capitalism, democracy and everything else, freedom, which is basically goes towards classical liberalism, not this modern left-wing liberalism, actually the definition of the word liberalism, and liberalizing things. The issue with that is that by default people become more middle class, more educated, more prosperous. They become too involved with the commercialization of everything and materialism. They will forget about traditional values. So that was a downfall of Western Europe. A lot of countries, including the UK, France, and many others, Germany. Then there are cultures that could have the balance, and that's the United States. Overall, apart from obviously during certain periods like now in California, and when we say California, we mostly mean LA and big cities, because, you know, outside of those big cities, big chunk of traditional people, conservative-minded people. But America, overall, as an entity, still could hold a balance between having traditional conservative values, Christian values, still go to church, but believe in free market capitalism. In countries like, again, stereotyping, overall Western Europe, the free market, liberal capitalist society has basically undermined the traditional cultures. In Japan, on the other hand, the traditional cultures, the culture basically fought back, which meant a lot of the younger people in Japan, and now they're in their 30s and 40s, they became careerists, big chunk of them. Everybody's working. They don't have enough babies because the traditional values went down. And then the other chunk, they're still so conservative that there's no innovation. There is no taking the risk to actually take advantage of free market capitalism. Japan had its peak late 20th century. Then, of course, the other brands came from Korea. Obviously, even when it comes to Samsung, the battle with Samsung and LG fighting back against Sony, and everything else that happened with China. China basically found a way to steal the concept of capitalism, but didn't do capitalism. They gave it to a corporatist, statist government. So essentially, in China, they have a centralized system economically, where they are copy and pasting what the West was doing, which is capitalism, making things and selling things. But they were like, okay, we're going to be in charge of that. Sort of like what Mussolini would have done in Italy. So in China, they basically have corporatist system. Then the West decided to, in order to compete with China, they also went towards corporatist globalist system, and everybody's basically been damaged for it. In Japan, they basically been left behind, aging population, not enough babies, and so that's why the left have been pushing for more migration. The same excuse has been used in Europe. We need more migration because we have an aging population, we don't have enough babies. Change your culture, improve it, go back to your traditions, fight back. You have to defend your own people. You need to find a way to have incentive for people to still believe in family values, but for those who want to obviously work, let them be free to be able to innovate. But have a lot of babies. Again, America has been the best case study in terms of that balance. How is the Brotherhood not banned in any sensible country? It's banned in Islamic countries, yeah, and now in the US. That should tell you something. Yeah, I mean, they're slightly behind, I guess, even though the warning coming from countries like UAE and Saudi Arabia saying, look at us, we had to push them out. Obviously, they're getting the blame now, because when UAE, Bahrain, Saudi, and all these guys decided to cleanse their societies from these jihadists, they had to push them out. And people are saying, well, that's it, it's these guys' fault. They're sending them to Europe. Well, I would have done the same thing. They kicked them out of their countries, yeah. It's your responsibility as Swedish government, as German government, as the British government to not let them in. Why are you letting them in? It makes no sense. Well, you can't even vet people's backgrounds and you say, come in. And then now you're blaming UAE or Saudi or Israel for pushing out the extremists from the Middle East. And now it's the same thing in the UK. People are blaming Emmanuel Macron and France for pushing out the illegal migrants from France. Well, I would have done the exact same thing. Why do you want them in your country? It's the job of the British state and the British government to not open the doors. But international law, international obligations, I don't care. Crazy. And that is exactly what the United States is going through. If you're here legally, great, assimilate. If you're not, get the F out. Exactly. It's a simple balance. The thing about the liberal lefties is that they say, well, look at America. America is a nation of immigrants. It's not. It was never a nation of immigrants. There was a big push in the 20th century that a lot of immigrants went there, but it was never a nation of immigrants. America was a nation of settlers. There's a huge difference. And America, even to this day, is very welcoming to those who would contribute. We have a lot of expats in America from Britain and other countries. They go in, they either invest or they have a talent, they add something to the US, and they respect the flag, they contribute, and of course they will go back home, whatever. And they build something. They don't take from the system. They're not immigrants. There's a whole difference between settlers and immigrants. That's what America was built on. People who took a gamble, took a massive risk to travel all the way to a strange land, and they said, it's on me. If I survive, I'll thrive. I'll be my own king. I don't want a king in Europe. I'm done with that. If I fail, I'll die. It's on me. That was the bravery of those settlers who went to America. But they don't get it. They say, well, now America's ready. Or the same thing that happened in Japan, late 20th century, late 1990s basically. People say, well, economic opportunity in Japan. Let's everybody go there. Why? You're not going there to contribute. You're going there to take from the system. Same in Sweden. Same in Deutschland. Cobra Chicken says, a Muslim Brotherhood set up shop in Toronto, Canada with our government's blessing. Why is my country so blind? Well, Canada has also been a safe haven for a lot of nutters, including the IRGC. But there are different reasons for that. John says, look at Poland, no issues at all. Yeah, Poland found a way to also have that balance for Poland. They have the traditional values. They still have a lot of babies. They're obviously Catholic, so they have a lot of babies. But they still believe in capitalism because they experience two things over the last century. They experienced the National Socialists. They also experienced the communists. They said, well, we don't want any level of collectivism. Just go back to basics. The Christian conservative values. Have a lot of babies, open up a business. Go to work, take care of your children. Balance. Poland and America got it. Now, Labour promoted the Muslim Brotherhood and the Tories went along with it. They never did it publicly, for the record, but yeah, because that would have been, even for Labour, that would have been way too controversial if they had actually promoted the Muslim Brotherhood. Islam is taking over Texas. 48 new mosques in less than 2 years. The big cities in Texas are facing massive challenge. Same thing happened in Michigan, of course, and New Jersey. So the fight back must begin. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. I hope this was informative. I'm Maya Tusi, and we are the media.